Let's talk about the laziest, easiest watercolor exercise that you can do that is still probably the most productive way to learn how to use your colors on the fly. So it's the new year and we're all getting back into the groove of creating again. And there are some days when you are still in holiday mode and you don't really want to create, or life has just been really busy and thrown you a chaotic schedule where you just don't have time to sit in the art studio and actually think about being creative. Your brain is basically dead. That has kind of happened to me this week. I had a rough week with pregnancy and also it was a very chaotic week. We had a lot of severe weather, and so things just did not go as planned, and I didn't have a lot of time to be necessarily creative in the art studio, and I didn't want to pressure myself necessarily to pop out an illustration. I almost feel like sometimes when you're trying to pressure yourself to do something when you're not in the mood per se, it can actually stifle your creativity. It's kind of like trying to work out when you have a pulled ligament. It's not really that great, but at the same time, it's good to keep that motivation going, and it's good to keep doing something to keep that creative drive going that's not overwhelming. So this is honestly the laziest, easiest exercise to do, yet it's still incredibly productive at learning how to use your watercolors. So I'm going to share this particular exercise with you today. So the very first thing that I really recommend you do is find cheap watercolor paper, or find a journal that you want to dedicate specifically to just abstract paintings and abstract watercolor exercises. This particular journal is basically a trash journal. It is not meant to be perfect. It is not meant to even look nice. I know a lot of us as artists, we want things to look nice. You need to set aside this particular journal for trash. Trash days. You're going to have trash days. No matter what level of creativity you have, whether you're an absolute noob or whether you're an expert and you've been doing this for years, you're going to have a trash day, but yet you still are going to have this feeling like, I need to be creative, but I don't have those creative juices. This is the journal that you pull when that happens. And what I'm going to be doing is walking you through 3 different types of exercises that you can do in this particular journal. I'm going to do them on a spreadsheet for 2 pages basically, but you do not have to do that. You can do one of these exercises, you can do all of them, you can do 2, or you can do your own thing. It does not matter. Like I said earlier, this particular journal is meant to be a trash journal. It is meant to be your exploratory, and you have really no goals other than putting paint to paper and learning what your paint does on the paper. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is gradients. Gradients are really great to kind of get an idea of what your paints do with one another, especially if you're working with a couple of different colors. So y'all voted, and we're going to be doing the blue and yellow bunny painting. So I really wanted to experiment with my blues because I'm going to be doing a large background with blues. And I wanted to play around. There were 2 different blues that I was kind of going, which one do I want to use? Do I want to use French Ultramarine, or do I want to use Winsor Blue Red shade? This is a great opportunity to play around with blues that might be similar and basically have them right next to each other so that you can see. So French Ultramarine is more of a purpley blue, and Winsor Blue Red is, I would say, more on the darker violety side of blue, but it's not as far on the color wheel as French Ultramarine. French Ultramarine would be like one step closer to purple than Winsor Blue Red. I knew that I wanted more of that purpley color. for my sky, and then I wanted to mix it with cobalt turquoise as well as manganese, and a little bit of white, and then kind of throw in a yellowy color. So my gradients are playing around with these specific two blues and seeing what colors I like best. For me, in this particular activity, I like the Winsor Blue Red better than the French Ultramarine, because French Ultramarine has a lot of granulation, and I could see that when I was doing my gradients. And since they were right next to each other, I was able to compare them very, very easily. I was also able to see what Winsor Blue Red did with the colors that I was thinking about using, and then what French Ultramarine did with the colors that I was thinking about using. Another thing that I wanted to do was throw in a yellow, and I was kind of torn. Should I try a cadmium lemon yellow, or should I just go a complete different direction and try a new gamboge? I tried both of those in gradients after I had kind of figured out that I wanted to do the Winsor Blue Red. And so then I compared what those two would look like and what color combo would give me the desired kind of green blue look that I was looking for my sky. So if you're kind of confused of what colors to kind of choose, a good rule of thumb for me is go on Pinterest and go look at color schemes. A lot of times you'll see these like little color palettes. They'll have a picture and then they have these little blocks down below. Look at the picture, see kind of what you like for a color. For me, I knew I wanted to experiment with blues because I'm doing a sky kind of theme for my next painting. But let's say you're completely clueless and you don't know what colors to choose. Go to Pinterest, find a color palette with the image, and kind of see what strikes your fancy. Which of those color images with the color palette you like in that moment, and then try as best as possible to match your paints to those colors that you have. So I normally recommend with this first exercise, when you're doing gradients, to choose 5 to 7 different colors and then try and narrow those down as you go. So that's kind of an idea of how to get a color scheme if you're not sure what colors to play around with. Just look at kind of color palettes that have maybe 5 to 7 different colors, and then try and match the colors that you have to those colors, and then play around with gradients. So once I kind of narrowed down, I would say, the colors that I liked for this particular gradient exercise, the next thing I wanted to do was play around with what do they do in wet. So what I did is I wet the paper first in this little block right here, and I just laid the colors down in a random order. I wanted to try and get all the colors kind of mixing and playing around with one another. So I tried to have it where basically the new gamboge, that's the yellow that I really liked, touched the manganese as well as the cobalt turquoise, as well as the Winsor Blue Red, and kind of vice versa. I had the Winsor Blue Red also touching the turquoise and the manganese in different ways. Another thing that I really like to do to kind of just add a bit of more whimsy to my wet is I like to use a very opaque white watercolor. So it's almost like a white gouache watercolor. I like to add that and make it look a little bit more turquoise. Since I'm working with traditional watercolors, they're a lot more transparent, and by adding a very, very, very opaque white watercolor, it just kind of adds this little sediment basically feel where it's very thick and very it basically just pushes my other colors out of the way. So I like to add white. I know a lot of watercolorists don't like to use white at all. It's kind of a no rule with watercolor. Use the white of the paper. Personally, I like to use white. Break your rules. This is a trash journal, and break your rules. Try and figure out Do I like this or do I not? This journal, once again, is meant to be destroyed. And once you have that wet and wet basically done the way you like, the next thing that I like to do for this particular section is play around with my mixed media supplies on top. So what I will do is just pull out some pencils, some ink pens, some gouache. I might even pull some iridescence or gold supplies, and there is no rhyme or reason to this. A lot of times I like to do dots and spots because that's what I like to do. You can do patterns, you can do stripes. It does not matter. Remember, this is a trash journal. But basically what we're trying to do is lay those mixed media supplies on top of your already dried wet and wet and see what those colors do. You'll notice some color pencils, they look really, really nice and they pop on the paper, and then others don't look nice at all. And it's nice to kind of have a good idea when you're going into a painting what supplies work with the colors that you're working with and what supplies don't. So any supply that I'm like, oh, I really like this color that I just laid down, you'll notice me kind of swatching a little bit at the top corner. Basically over in this little corner over here, you'll see me adding little color swatches of the pencils that I really liked using, so that if I ever use these colors in the future for basically another illustration, I don't have to think off the top of my head what colors work and which ones don't, and do I need to swatch these while I'm painting. I can just refer to this particular journal and find the ones that I like immediately. So as you can see, I added a bunch of color pencils that I personally really liked, as well as 2 ink pen colors and a couple of gouache colors that I liked adding on top of my wet and wet. So currently right now we have done 2 exercises. We played around with gradients, basically on a wet on dry surface. We've played around with wet on wet with these particular watercolors. And now we're playing around with mixed media. That's the 3rd stage. The last thing that I like to do is glazing. So I like to usually do this over a large, one whole page of paper. I like to do this so that I have a lot of room to play around. And you'll notice I tried to do some negative painting. I am very, very rusty on negative painting. I haven't done it in a couple of years. I definitely need to go back and work on that again. But I tried to do some basic negative, really, really simple negative painting. Remember, this is a trash journal. We don't really care whether it looks good or not. Play around. And for me, this negative painting with the little fish did not turn out that well, but it's not that big of a deal. My whole point and my whole goal of this particular exercise is to see how these colors lay on top of one another. And also, I'm going to be adding some mixed media kind of elements to this and see how they glaze on top of each other as well. So this will be a little bit different than the previous mixed media exercise that we were doing. This one was kind of just picking out the supplies that I wanted to use. This one now, this next stage, the glazing exercise, is basically figuring out different ways that I would enjoy using the supplies that I've already picked out. So do I want to, the reason why I kind of went with the fish theme is I was thinking maybe scales would be really cool to play around with and add like a little iridescent scales, like the rainbow fish is kind of what was going on in my head. So that was kind of my thought process for this particular glazing activity. You don't have to do that. You can just swatch colors right on top and do shapes. That's a very popular thing to do, is just do weird random shapes and kind of just put them together. You can do a Zen doodle pattern with glazing on top. Just make it simple where you don't really have to think. Like I said earlier, this is the laziest watercolor exercise basically activity that you can do that is still very, very productive and informative. So those are kind of my thoughts on simple and easy, lazy exercises that you can do in a trash watercolor journal. In the comments down below, I would love to hear from y'all. What other exercises do you like to do that are kind of trash, lazy exercises that are still really informative and easy to just go on the go and do them really, really fast. When you're not in that creative mode, please leave those comments down below. I would love to hear new exercises that I can add to this particular trash journal. I just kind of go with the flow a lot of times, so I have a lot of different activities that I do, but most of them kind of go with these exercises that I shared with you today. But yeah, leave those comments down below. I'd love to hear more, and I'm sure other Misfitians would like to hear other exercises that y'all do that you find really helpful and informative that are super easy. So lots of love, y'all, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.